So I'll just sing a little prayer to start off with. Remembering that prayers aren't necessarily some empty ritual. They're actually a series of thoughts. And Buddha says that every thought we have is a seed that we plant in our mind that will bring a fruit similar to that seed in terms of our future experiences. In fact, this is the creative principle according to Buddha. So given this, then every thought we have really does count. So this prayer which we're singing in Tibetan, the first part of it, if we're Buddhists already, then what it's doing is expressing our reliance upon the Buddha, his teachings, the spiritual community. And if we're not, then that's okay, just leave it. And then the second part of the prayer is expressing our altruistic motivation for doing this activity of listening to these ideas of the Buddha, seeing if there's something reasonable within them that we can apply to our own lives. This is what we're singing. So have those thoughts, in your mind. Because also it's said that, according to Buddha, it's the motivation, the reason for doing something is the main determining factor in the result that will come from what we do, say and think. Not the thing itself, the motivation. So our motivation is something altruistic. I'm listening to these teachings, thinking about their meaning, seeing if there's something to apply to my life, so that I can develop my marvelous qualities that Buddha says we all possess innately, so that in turn I can be useful to others. This is why I'm here. Sangye chadang tsogye chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyabsu chi dagi chunyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye dropa shog sangye chadang tsogye chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyabsu chi dagi chunyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye dropa shog sangye chadang tsogye chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyabsu chi dagi chunyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye dropa shog. Well, why we want to change our mind is because, according to Buddha, that's it's the source of whether we're happy or whether we suffer. It's the source. I mean, mind. You could even say that mind is really the creator. Not in the magic wand sort of sense, but in an evolutionary, organic sense. That whatever we say, do and think is literally, in Buddhist terms, the creative principle. There isn't definitely Buddha talks about superior being, or beings, plural. Buddha means this. But Buddha is not asserting that the job of a superior being is to create beings. And so, if we ask the question to Buddha, well, who made me? Buddha would say, well, honey, you made you, In a very real sense, Buddha is saying this, that the mind, what is in our mind, our thoughts, our feelings, unconscious, subconscious, intellect, emotions, which is all, which is encompassed by the word mind, this is the source. This is the creative energy. This is the creative principle. So therefore, absolutely, we need to know our minds. It's the job of a Buddhist, As Lama Yeshe would say, the job is to be our own therapist. And it sounds cute, but it really is profoundly true. Or as Lama Zopa Rinpoche would say, the workshop is in the mind. So if it's true, if we need to change why would you want to change your mind? Well, it seems fairly logical. The only reason to change something is if you can make it better. So, the starting point, or the reference point, if you like, for a person who's a Buddhist is Buddha's assertion that every living being necessarily, possesses the potential innately to have this mind of theirs fully developed, fully developed, beyond which it can't be developed further. So there's a nice analogy that Mahayana Buddhism uses, that a bird needs two wings. And so a person who's fully developed their mind is a person who has achieved the wisdom wing and the compassion wing. Another word for this is Buddha. It's Sanskrit, it means fully awake, which actually has a very interesting implication, doesn't it? The implication being that we're asleep now. And this is very much how Buddha talks, you know. And so where all this occurs is in this mind of ours. And so so one way of looking at it is if we ask the question, do we want to be happy? It sounds almost simplistic, you know. But I think we can very definitely say yes. Do we want to suffer? We would say no. So one of the approaches of this, one of the characteristics of this fully developed mind, this Buddhahood, or enlightenment, these words are synonymous, one of the characteristics is fully developed happiness, complete contentment, fulfillment, wholeness, whatever words you want, you know. So Buddha's saying we all have this potential. And one of the things actually that's incredibly important when we listen to Buddha's ideas, Buddha's teachings, and this I can't stress enough, you know. I think the second we hear the word religion or spiritual, we immediately get rather vague. We immediately seem to lose common sense, you know. I mean, when we hear something called science or numbers, or, you know, we're very practical. We know it's to do with real, touchable things. But somehow the moment we hear spiritual and religious, we don't think it's real, touchable, doable, you know. It's something beyond now. It's something somewhere else in the sky. But somehow the approach in Buddhism is it's the exact same attitude that we would have towards learning numbers, learning how to make cakes, learning how to become a carpenter. It's something you learn the theory, you learn a very precise theory. You're not vague about it when you're learning numbers. You know, it's very precise. And in fact, the precision and clarity and depth of analysis that we know we need to use to understand physical phenomena is exactly what Buddha demands of us. When we need to, you know, in the understanding of our own mind, understanding of how the universe is, how the world is, what makes it happen, you know. And so it's incredibly important when we listen to Buddha's teachings. It's the same way that we listen to Einstein telling us about his findings about relativity. You wouldn't hear it as something that you just have to believe. You don't hear it as something metaphysical. Yes, maybe difficult, but we hear it as something real, practical, that he has through his own experience found, you know, discovered, not invented, but found, observed. Well, that exactly is the approach with Buddha. In other words, the one probably a fundamental difference between most religious paths and Buddhist approach is that the teachings of Buddhism, Buddha's ideas, aren't revealed to him by somebody, which is the usual view. And I'm not criticizing, nothing wrong, but I'm just saying the Buddhist view is not that one. There's nothing revealed about Buddha's teachings. What Buddha's view of reality is simply Buddha's findings about how things exist, what mind is, what causes things to happen, what is happiness, what is suffering, what are beings, where do they come from, the universe, why happiness, why suffering, why Mother Teresa, why Osama bin Laden, whatever, you know. In just the same way that we know if we had Einstein up here telling us about his findings, we would listen, we'd listen with respect, and we would know that if we wanted to find this out for ourselves, that the steps are all there for us in order to discover absolutely for ourselves that it is so, you know. Well, that's the attitude to take with Buddha's teachings. He's saying, in a sense, don't believe a single word I'm telling you. Listen to it. If there's something reasonable there, then we go into it and we can investigate for ourselves whether or not it is true. There's something very interesting in this. You know, it's like when we think of happiness, we think of spiritual, we think of being kind to others, we would rarely think about wisdom, we would rarely think about knowing things as they are, we would rarely think about finding truth. They seem to be two completely different pursuits. Well, actually, you know, then in Buddhist terms, they're not. You know, they intersect perfectly. Buddha's views of reality, Buddha's philosophy, Buddha's views about what exists, how things are, completely intersect with Buddha's, understanding of mind. In other words, Buddha's philosophy and psychology intersect perfectly. For a Buddhist, there's no contradiction between these. There's no contradiction between philosophy, religion, way of life, psychological. They all come together. They must come together. In just the same way, again, if you were to hear a recipe for a cake, you know that necessarily everything in that recipe has to count precisely and will bring you the result of the cake. You don't have something in a recipe, because you like the sound of it. Or you like the look of 3 lemons, Sounds nice, say. Whatever's in that recipe has to bring you the experience of that cake. So Buddha's philosophy is, in a sense, his recipe, And this is where they intersect is very interesting, What Buddha's saying is that the extent to which our minds are not in sync with how things are is the extent to which we suffer. So the pursuit of a Buddhist, the pursuit of happiness, is the pursuit of truth, necessarily. Because Buddha is saying, as we remove from our minds the veils that prevent us from seeing things as they are, not only prevent us from seeing things as they are, but cause us to live in a fantasy world. As we remove these, so we become happier. We become clearer and we become happier. Because it's being caught up in, as Buddha would refer to them, as the delusions, the unhappy emotions that are the cause of our suffering. And why they cause us suffering is because we're not in touch with reality. So there's this complete relationship, between how things exist, so-called philosophy, and experiences, the mind, psychology. So, Buddha's saying, like I said, Buddha is saying that each of us, if you exist, if you're a sentient being, which is the English term usually used to translate the Tibetan term Tse Chen, which means mind possessor. If you're a mind possessor, then necessarily you're a potential Buddha, And again, hearing this as a word that we call religious, hear it as something psychological. It's in Buddhist terms, the logical extension of where we are now. That if we can begin to develop from where we are now, we will end up as a Buddha. It's not some leap somewhere into some metaphysical realm after this ordinary physical one. It's a logical, natural, organic, step-by-step process. And you can actually say it's psychological. So, that sounds limiting in some way because we tend to have a view that, when we use the word psychology, we use our own Western models of the mind, So when we hear that Buddha says this mind of ours has the potential to be absolutely full of what we call the positive qualities, love, kindness, compassion, wisdom, joy, you name them. We have the capability of developing these to a degree that would be absurd almost in our culture, Then you could say that actually that's psychological, but just Buddha is actually being quite radical. That's all. He's being extremely radical in his assertion of what's possible. And he's equally saying, this is part of the deal, that we can be completely free of what we call the suffering qualities, the negative ones, the ones that cause us suffering, the ones that cause us to harm others. And, we don't need God or Buddha or philosophers to tell us when we hear these words, jealousy, anger, fear, depression, anxiety. What Buddha's fundamental point is that every single living being, each one of us, every living being, has the potential innately. It's the very nature of our mind, in fact, to be fully developed in these 2 wings, to see reality as it is, to see clearly the minds of others and things as they are, the implication of which is our own happiness and joy, and the implication of which is therefore the capacity to be infinitely compassionate and skillful in our ability to benefit others. This is, speaking simply, this is the words that would refer to a person who's done this job, who's developed this potential, a person who's achieved their own Buddhahood, these religious words. But actually we're dealing with the mind. We're dealing with the mind. Buddhism doesn't use the term soul, some secret part, not some special part of us, that's untouched by something ordinary. We have, there's one way of talking in the more esoteric teachings of Buddhism, Buddhist Tantra, that talk about gross level of consciousness, conscious awareness, which is the gross level, the day-to-day sensory, conceptual capacity for awareness that we live in as humans, But this is the tip of the iceberg, according to Buddha. Then we have subtle consciousness, a subtler capacity for awareness. And we virtually never touch that. We get glimpses. We could say we get glimpses, when we have some sensitivity towards others, awareness of others' feelings, intuition, these things. We're just glimpsing the outside, if you like, of this subtler capacity. But that for great meditators, beings who have really in a sophisticated way developed their minds to an extraordinary degree, they've developed this level, and that capacity, that level of the mind, that level of mental capacity, is such that one can see past and future. One can see the minds of others. We can call this metaphysical, but this is a natural progression, Buddha says, in our psychological development. This is what our potential is. And then we can even say there's very subtle consciousness. And there's a term for this that's, it's indestructible consciousness. This is the subtlest level of our conscious being, if you like, beyond which it can't be subtler. And this is what Buddha would say is, as I said, indestructible. And this implies that it has never not existed. So in Buddhist terms, there's no concept of creation in the usual religious idea. There's no concept of creation. I didn't get made by somebody. So this is where we see that in Buddhist view that the idea of what the mind is extremely important to understand it. And one of the things is that it's not physical. Not one atom of my mind, my intellect, emotions, feelings, unconscious, subconscious, spirit, what we would even call soul, if you like, whatever you like, Not one atom of this is non-physical. In normal religious terms, what we call the spirit or the soul is not physical, but in Buddhist terms, the whole deal of your inner being, everything that isn't your body, isn't your eyelashes, isn't your nose, that's your mind, and that's not physical. Doesn't get created by Buddha or God or some superior being. Doesn't come from nowhere. It's not some random event. That's an absurd idea. But also, shockingly enough for most of us, we do not come from our parents. Body, not a problem. Egg and sperm come together, and form into this body. But Buddha says the body, the brain, is not the mind. There clearly is a very intimate relationship. That's evident, but is not the mind. The mind is mine. My mind is mine. If I had perfect memory, I could trace my mental moments right back to the first moment of conception. We know that's where it inexorably leads to, goes back to. But Buddha would say you can trace it back to a previous moment before the egg and sperm came together, that very consciousness. You don't trace yourself back to a creator. You don't trace yourself back to your parents. You trace your own consciousness back to previous moments of itself. So clearly, our parents, the external environment, plays a major role in who we are. But it's not just semantics. It's a major difference actually. The Buddhist view, the main cause of who I am is my past. The activities and events within my past within my consciousness before. And this is the idea of karma. This is the principle. This is the creative principle in Buddhism, if you like. Everything I say, everything I do, everything I think, everything I feel is a seed, like I said before, that is implanted in my consciousness, in my continuity of consciousness. And this, like any seed, will ripen at some point as experiences. This is the principle of karma. As I said, in this sense, we can say we are the fruit of what we have done before. So philosophically, it's a really interesting idea. We could get extremely interested and study it very deeply and get full marks in our philosophy exam. But none of that's the point. The point of it is the experiential. The point of it is to really get the experiential implications of it. And this is where Buddha talks at a kind of a deeper level about how changing the mind is absolutely fundamental to happiness, to capacity to benefit others, to the development of our potential. And changing the mind isn't something mysterious, It's really changing the way we see things. It's not a joke to say that Buddha really is a supreme cognitive therapist. This is actually the idea that what we think determines how we feel, determines whether we suffer, and the rest is exactly what Buddha is saying. But may I suggest, my feeling is he goes to much, again, more radical levels. The Buddha says that when one of the crucial ways we practice as a Buddhist is to learn to know our mind, and that means to know when we point here to the heart, to know our emotions, because we can clearly see up here, if you like, here is the mind. We think 1 and 1 is 2 is the mind, but we know somehow it's not the learning of numbers that causes us happiness or suffering. It's not the learning of simply having constructing new intelligent ideas. It's our approach to it. It's where we point here, the heart, our emotions, what we call our emotions. Now, what's totally interesting about this and about Buddha's view is we have these, according to Buddha, he's arguing with a series of assumptions that we all seem to have that we simply take to be true, that we accept them unquestioningly. So even if we're religious, even if we do, accept a creator, and that's completely our decision and our choice, I'm not even a discussion about that. Nevertheless, we would all accept absolutely that we're made by our parents, and we must trace back a lot of our suffering or happiness to our parents. Now, in one way, that's not mistaken. Buddha would also agree, because external conditions do play a major role in our lives. It's very obvious. In the same way that, the water and the soil and the sunshine play a crucial role in the growth of that apple tree. But we all know the central cause, the main cause, is the apple seed. You can have the best soil on earth, but if the seed it has got problems, it'll never grow properly as an apple tree. So the external conditions, the parents, our education, the external environment do play a major role. But it's like, Buddha's saying, it's like we give the total power, the total cause to those things, as if the sun and the water and the soil are the main cause for there being an apple tree. And we just simply know it's not true. So the main cause of who we are, Buddha says, is not our parents, is not the external environment, is not the Catholic nuns who educated me. The main cause of who we are is the past actions of our own. The word karma is Sanskrit, and it means action, but has this dynamic implication of implying a reaction. That everything we say, do, and think is a karma, an action that brings a reaction. A seed that brings a fruit. So we are the living, walking, talking, thinking, feeling fruits of past seeds, which we planted, which were planted, if you like, by the previous us, and were labelled Fred or Mary or dog or something. But same continuity of consciousness. This is the Buddhist idea. So we could go into more detail about karma, but the real point here is the experiential implication of this, as I said, which is that I'm responsible, not guilty, which is how we hear it, not guilty. There's no concept of sort of blame, victim-oppressor. In Buddhism, there's no concept of sort of, punishment and reward. Somebody out there punishing or rewarding us. So if we think, and if we have that as an assumption, and then we think, oh, you mean I'm the person who's the cause and I must be the blame. We have this kind of very strong view, it seems, isn't it? This basically victim mentality that Buddha would say. This sense that, again, you look at one of the assumptions we seem to have, that we don't question. It's kind of cliched, but you check. It's how we feel if we really analyse. That somehow I didn't ask to get born. Excuse me, someone plonked me here. I didn't ask to get born. In a sense, saying, what's it got to do with me, So when we really learn to be our own therapists, really learn to practice the Buddha's path, really attempt to practice it, what we are learning to understand is this part of our mind. Because Buddha's saying they are the wrong assumptions, deeply held in the bones of our being, that we need to kind of strip away and to deconstruct in order to learn to reconstruct, Buddha would say, views about how reality is that are in sync with reality. So here obviously, this means we need to check up, because we might not agree that Buddha is talking about reality. We might think his view of reality is completely wrong. Well, that's fine. That's up to us. We don't have to believe Buddha. But clearly Buddha, when he presents his views of reality, just like Einstein, he is saying, I am right. But he's not saying you have to believe him. That's the point, So Buddha says we have these series of assumptions in our mind, deeply held in the bones of our being, that are completely mistaken, that are out of sync with reality. And as long as we live according to those wrong assumptions, we are always going to suffer. We're going to bump our heads against the wall continuously, So one of these wrong assumptions, Buddha would say, is this one that I didn't, that somehow someone made me, put me here. What's it got to do with me? This is the hand of cards that I was dealt with. What can I do, And you check, that's how we really feel. We know, most interestingly, we have a lot of capacity in our culture to develop the intellect, to develop skills, technical skills. But we don't really think we can change our hearts at all. We think, well, I was born with this amount of anger, that amount of love, that amount of generosity, this amount of jealousy, this amount of depression. What to do? We're not really given many techniques. We don't go to courses, how to develop how to get rid of a depression like this, We just tend to think this is who I am, this is the way I was made, and so we sort of think we have to make the most of it. But the Buddhist idea is that absolutely we have to make the most of it, but it's not fixed in space. The tendencies are there since the time we were conceived, Buddha says, and we can see this. You look at little children coming out, little tiny things. If we look objectively and use, this psychological view, you can see jealousy, anger, unhappiness, contentment in little babies, Old souls, as we say, isn't it? We can see they weren't brand new little things made by those parents. We can see they've got their own tendencies. Some children have tendencies since tiny kids to stamp on snails and hurt them. Other children will cry, Like a friend of mine, her child, when he was 3, she was taking the lice out of his head and he cried, "Mummy, Mummy, leave them alone. Don't hurt them. It's their home." She was surprised. She hadn't taught him this. I mean, where did this come from? He's 3. He doesn't read, He can't. It was in his heart. So where did that come from, Somehow. We can see there's little formed beings right there. So Buddha says all those imprints, the tendencies are there. We bring the tendencies with us. This is the creative principle. So these emotions that we have, we can see the tendencies since we're tiny kids. So the idea here, the implication of the karmic idea, is that then I can learn to know, if I'm learned to know what I think and feel since a very tiny child, recognize that they're mine, and know, this is the miracle, that I can change. That I can learn to develop even more my love, my kindness, my compassion. It hasn't got a lid on it, Buddha says we can develop it infinitely, to degrees that we would think are insane if we heard some of the examples. And that we can get rid of jealousy, anger, fear, depression, which is almost a shocking idea for us. It's kind of interesting. We know when we say those words that they are heartbreaking, that we do not like them, if they're inside us or whether we're on the receiving end. We know they are terrible. Anger, depression, fear, jealousy, anxiety. But at the same time, when we hear that maybe we should try to get rid of them, we feel like defensive, as that we ought to keep them. It's normal, it's human behaviour, we'd be abnormal if we didn't have them. So it's a bit schizophrenic, somehow. I mean, one of the arguments we often have is that we need to have anger, we need to have suffering in order to appreciate happiness. Well, I'm sorry, it's a nice theory. So you mean you would like me to punch you first before I'm kind to you? Just so you can appreciate my kindness? I don't think so, We're not stupid. We recognise kindness when we see it. We don't need to refer to that suffering punch to recognise it. Okay, we will appreciate it all the more if we've just been punched. But we don't need to have suffering in order to know happiness. This is just not true. If we analyse our experiences, we can see. So the Buddhist idea, it's two things here actually. The Buddhist idea is we do have the potential. And why is because Buddha says nothing's permanent. Nothing's fixed in space. Nothing can't be changed. There's nothing that can't be changed. It's the very nature, in fact. I mean, one of Buddha's main tenets, that again is used not as some interesting philosophical concept, but is really thought about deeply and meditated upon until we get some experience of it, is that everything that comes together in dependence upon causes and conditions is necessarily impermanent. It's in a state of flux. So the mind, more than anything, is that. Things shift and change and move. So it's the terrible irony of ego, which is what Buddha says is the root of our problems, this fundamental, primordial misconception locked into the bones of our being about our own concrete I, is the one that limits us completely, completely limits us and paralyzes us. We are convinced that this is who I am, this is the way I was made, what can I do about it? No wonder we get depressed. I mean, no wonder we get anxious, because there's this awful sense of hopelessness sometimes. It's the irony of ego, One of the starting points for a person attempting to practice Buddhism is to listen to, Buddha's ideas and then to try to internalize it, to see the truth of it. That there's nothing that can't be changed. There's nothing that can't be changed. Everything is a question of practice, and this is where this cognitive therapy comes in. It's a question of, changing the way we see things, and there's nothing in us that can't be changed. I mean, it's an extremely liberating idea, So as long as we have the assumption that I'm stuck, this is who I am, of course it's hopeless. Of course, and it's very painful to want to take responsibility for what's inside there. Of Because if we don't have much sense that we can change it, it's best to leave it alone and pretend it's not there, isn't it? Or to blame other people for it, which is what we do, you know. But if we do have some kind of comprehension from listening and thinking and contemplating these things, that I am not fixed in space, no matter how garbage my mind is, no matter how difficult things are, I can learn to change. I mean, it's a really simple idea, but quite profound. Then there's great courage. And then there's much more courage to persevere through the obstacles, but also more courage to see what is there. Of course I don't want to look at my anger if I'm convinced I can't change it. It's much easier to blame somebody else. Or to internalize it and be completely depressed, you know, which is just internalized anger. Buddha says we have this, that, you know, if we analyze this, we can see the truth of it. Forget even about karma, you know. Don't think about past lives even. If we observe our mind, observe our experiences, we can see it as logical that they change. Therefore, I can take control of it, not be dragged along by the nose. I can make decisions about how to change. I'm the boss of my life, you know. I mean, we all say we want to be happy. We all know we have things like anxiety and fear and depression and jealousy, attachment, anger. We all know these words. We recognize them immediately. And we all know they are extremely painful. But somehow, this is the tragedy too. This is the one of this view of putting it onto others, you know, this view that this is how I am, or clearly the view too, especially the view that we have, again, deep in the bones of our being, which Buddha is fundamentally debating with, is that, you know, that the outside things are the source of my happiness and suffering. This is a view we absolutely all accept, without question. It appears this way, it feels this way, it smells this way, it looks this way. That the outside is the source of my happiness, the outside is the source of my suffering. And this is where it is most interesting, really investigating our minds psychologically, investigating the emotions, where we start to see one aspect of these emotions. And that is the capacity, the aspect of the emotions that's indicated by the term delusion. Delusion. What Buddha's saying is there are two characteristics, actually, to our unhappy states of mind. And these two characteristics are exactly what the happy states, the positive states of mind, are free of. So the unhappy states of mind, that's the suffering ones or the negative ones, also called delusions, have the two characteristics, and one of them is really evident. And that is that this is a term in Tibetan, a translation of a term which is a synonym for negative state of mind, unhappy state of mind, delusion. It is disturbing emotion. It's really clear it's disturbing. To me, don't worry about anybody else. When anger's in my mind, when jealousy is there, when anxiety is there, it is disturbing. I am disturbed, and that's called unhappy. It's very simple. Now, already what blocks us from really seeing this and learning deeply from it, because we all know we don't want suffering. So what blocks us from really owning responsibility for that and seeing it, that it's causing me suffering, is our absolute belief that I'm depressed because that happened, and I'm angry because she did this, and I'm jealous because he did that, you know. So we see the cause on the outside. So we know it's painful, but it almost seems outrageous that I should stop my anger. Excuse me, what do you mean? You should stop what you're doing. I'm allowed to be angry. I am right to be angry, we think. So we know it's painful, but we have this view, this philosophical view, that yes, it's painful, but you did it. Therefore, you know, you should change. So we're kind of paralyzing ourselves, blocking ourselves up, you know. It's almost like I've just eaten some poison and it's causing me suffering. Like the anger is causing me suffering, okay? And I've eaten some poison and it's going to bring more suffering. But then I say, excuse me, you put the poison in my food, it's your fault. But every day I'm getting more miserable, more sick, you know. But it's your fault, why should I change? I mean, it's demented, right? I'm suffering. It doesn't matter who did it to me. So it's sort of simple. We know these words. Buddha didn't invent this, you know. We know these things. But this is the very heart of Buddha's practice. And thinking about this, meditating on it, it brings some strong conviction, some strong confidence That yes, indeed, what people do to me in the world, indeed, is extremely suffering. The world does appalling things to each other. There's no question, you know. But if I really know that I have the power to change my response to it, then already so liberating, unbelievable. So this attitude we have that the outside is the source of our suffering, the outside is the source of our happiness, is actually completely, it's like giving our power to everything else. And it's the blame mentality. It's the blame mentality. I blame you. I point to you as the source of my suffering. But it's really the same when things make me happy. I point to the chocolate cake, and it's like I'm blaming the chocolate cake for making me happy. I give the responsibility to the cake, you know. What can I do? Look at it, so delicious. Vibrating deliciousness at me, demanding that I eat it, you know. What can I do? This is how we think, isn't it? What can I do? You punch me, of course I'm going to get angry. What do you mean not get angry? Don't be ridiculous, you know. It's impossible. That's how we think, right? We're like complete victims to the punch or to the chocolate cake. So having this changing slowly, you know, this view, that I can change my view. That actually, and this is what Buddha is saying, when we really start to investigate the anger that blames, the attachment that grasps, we start to see it has this characteristic, one, of being disturbing, which is unhappiness, suffering, but two, indicated by the term delusion, it's a liar. That in reality, this attachment in my mind is what literally makes up the story delicious chocolate cake. We think right now with these views that the cake innately is delicious. The deliciousness is somehow in the cake, as if you put a spoonful of it in when you put the chocolate and the eggs in, right? That somehow, isn't it, it looks delicious out there, doesn't it? It's totally fascinating, this. And Buddha's saying that's because of unbelievable, enormous habit of projecting onto the outside, that the very energy of attachment is such that it has the function of literally inventing, making the cake look delicious to my eyes. And then we grasp at it, thinking we need it, you know, having expectation that it will bring me happiness, and then being upset when it doesn't come. Attachment, actually, Buddha says, is almost the default mode of our mind. It's the one that is completely at the source, you know, of our suffering. The day-to-day is like a motor that propels us from moment to moment, you know, so deeply ingrained in our minds. That it is an emotion, definitely, but the emotion part is just the gross level. That's because we've thought these thoughts. We've made up this conceptual construction, this story in the mind that invents delicious chocolate cake, gorgeous person, lovely this, beautiful that. Our mind has made it up. Not just instantly. The habit of it is there, you know. Not just now. It's there from habit, ancient habit. And so anything we've done that often, it affects the energy of the body. So all the things happen, you know. When you get angry, same thing. Anger, we definitely think of as an emotion. And it is. It's got that component. But that's the grossest level of it. But when we begin to investigate our mind through much meditation, using these sophisticated psychological techniques called meditation, which is what they are, we begin to become extremely familiar with the workings of our mind well before it vomits out the mouth, which is usually the only time we know we're angry, you know? The only time we know we're depressed, when we can't get ourselves out of bed one morning. But the thoughts that are behind the emotion, the bare bones of the emotion, have been there a long, long time. And they're all working away, but because we're not familiar with our minds, we haven't got skills to really hear the subtle story going on underneath. We only notice it when it comes to the surface. When we start to look into our minds, be our own therapists in this way, we really can see the mind clearly, really can see, and it's like it's going speeding very, very fast. So we learn to be able to analyse it, break it down, you know, distinguish between the various. It's like one big soup in there right now, all the thoughts and feelings and emotions, like not just a regular soup, but a pureed soup, completely merged together, you know, impossible to distinguish. But it is possible. We have to look. And that's the skill we have to learn, you know. And then we can start to have more power. Then we can see that really delicious chocolate cake is an invention of our mind. Not just the first day. I mean, Lama Yeshe says, I can tell you about attachment for one whole year. We will never begin to understand it. It's extremely subtle, actually. So that the really interesting function of these unhappy states of mind, one is clearly that they're disturbing, which is the suffering. But two is that they're liars. They're liars. They lead us up garden paths, you know. In other words, this is exactly what I was saying before, that Buddha is saying the extent to which we're not in sync with reality, which is exactly the function of these unhappy emotions, is the extent to which we suffer. Because we follow, you know, as long as we think the cake is that delicious thing, and as long as we believe it will make me happy when I get it, as long as we give it all this power that it really doesn't possess, as long as we have all these massive expectations, all this neediness, which is the energy of attachment, then we are absolutely guaranteed to suffer. Guaranteed. We're setting ourselves up for disaster every time. Attachment is pervasive, you know. It's not just some people have a suffering of attachment. And again, that's the view in our culture in general. That someone who's an addict, you know, we use the word addiction. But it's, in Buddhist terms, it's a synonym for attachment. Really, truly. So we think an addict is a person who, you know, is addicted to heroin, addicted to alcohol, addicted to cigarettes. We usually define the addiction by the unhappy object, you know. But Buddha says, excuse me, we're all addicts. Truly, it's just a question of degree, that's all. And the name of addiction is attachment, desire, addiction. And Buddhist psychology, as I'm saying, you know, has very precise, clear ways of describing how it functions. And this is what we use as a basis for our meditation, to investigate our minds. Not just to believe that attachment is wrong, which is the guilty way we tend to be. Oh, I shouldn't be attached. Nonsense. We need to understand why. And that we have to investigate it, to see for ourselves. And then no one needs to convince us of anything. We know ourselves then, you know. Attachment's a liar. Anger is a liar. Jealousy is a liar. They're elaborate conceptual constructions that our mind makes up. Buddha's not joking when he says this, you know. It's subtle. It's hard to see. But this is why we need to learn these skills to look. And they're called meditation. Again, don't mystify them, really. They're very practical techniques. They're not religious. A communist could meditate, you know. It's not religious, it's not holy. It's extremely difficult to focus and sharpen the mind in order to see what's going on inside, you know, which is what we need to do. I mean, if we can't know our own minds, that's a bit insane, isn't it? I mean, who can, you know? I mean, the way it is in our culture, we don't really have methods that we're brought up with. We're supposed to just make the most of it and be a good person. And then when we completely can't handle it, we have people called therapists whom we go to. Okay, that's great, aren't we lucky? We're very fortunate. But the very fact that we need to have an expert who knows about the mind, you know? But it's my mind. If I can't know about my mind, it's astonishing. So we first have to want to do it. We have to see there's a logical reason, not a guilty reason. If we feel there's some space there to be more content, less neurotic, less jealous, less angry, less depressed, more in control of our mind, more kind, more loving, if we do feel there's some space, then there's work to do, you know. And all Buddha's saying is it's possible. It's doable. It's not mysterious, it's not metaphysical. It's hard work. It's the hardest job we'll ever do. But then it makes everything worthwhile. Whether you want to become a millionaire, a footballer, a mother, you'll do every job better. If you want to benefit others, you'll do that better. This is the Buddhist approach. Did I do my job yet or not? No, it's a bit early. Unless there's any burning questions. Now maybe I'll say some more. Let me say a bit more about these two wings again, you know. This wisdom wing, which is what I've been talking about up until now, roughly speaking, is where you really learn to become very familiar with this whole concept of karma as a very experiential, you know, thing, not just interesting philosophy, and really learn to shift the mind, to take more responsibility, to be more empowered actually, then to learn to know in the more sophisticated way the workings of the mind, really precisely, really clearly, slowly kind of unraveling the complexities of these emotions of ours. And to whatever extent we're capable of doing this, to this extent we can benefit others by practicing the compassion wing, you know. So you could say the work on the wisdom wing, the direct beneficiary of that is yourself. Now don't for a second think that's not spiritual. We often get guilty and think, well, that isn't spiritual, that's me, it's self-centered, Absolute nonsense. If I cannot develop my own mind, if I don't know why I'm suffering, if I can't understand my human condition, how can I possibly understand yours? Impossible. If I can't play the piano, how can I teach you to play piano? So compassion is the ability, Buddha, we would define in Buddhist psychology that compassion is the wish that you don't suffer. It's the empathy with the suffering of another. So unless I have that for myself, okay, they don't use that word in Buddhism. They would say we need to develop what we call renunciation, which sounds rather forbidding, but it really is this idea of compassion for yourself. This is coming from the wisdom wing. You have to know from investigation what the potential of your own mind is, what you're capable of, what the suffering states of mind are, what the positive ones are, distinguish them, and learn to begin to have some control over the whole process. Then I'm qualified to see another person, to help another person, because we're all basically just variations on the theme, really. So the direct beneficiary of compassion is others. All the work on the compassion wing is directly to benefit others. But it's based on the assumption of some work that you've done on yourself. And most crucial, it's based on the idea of the understanding of your own suffering. So what's suffering? I mean, this is an awful word, Buddha has a very interesting view towards suffering. There's one like package of suffering. We can talk about the ordinary, the first level, there's three of them. First kind is ordinary, everyday, in-your-face suffering, which we all agree with. Aches and pains and miserable and people leaving us and like that, Then there's a subtler level of suffering, which we wouldn't even call suffering, which is a bit scary. We actually call it happiness. And that's what we get when we follow attachment. So this is where Buddha would say that attachment is this really deceptive, appalling state of mind. So don't, for 1 second, confuse it with positive states of mind. I mean, we use that word virtually interchangeably now, I think, don't we? Attachment with attachment, love, pleasure. In Buddhist terms, love is the wish that others be happy. It's necessarily altruistic. It's got nothing to do with attachment. But as far as we're concerned, attachment, the way Buddha understands it, only for us comes with love. We usually only attach to people we love. And we usually only love people we're attached to. So it's like we can be forgiven for thinking they're virtually the same thing. But in Buddhist terms, they're completely different. One is deceptive. It's completely neurotic. It's dependent in the neurotic way. It's fearful. It's lonely. It's needy. It has all these massive expectations. It's not accurate in its assessment of the object, the person. It lives in a fantasy land. And it's the source of so much pain. Its energy is neediness. And why do you think you need something? Because you think you lack it. Whereas love, actually attachment, which is the disease we all have, this addiction we all have, and attachment is endless in its capability of creating objects to grasp onto, to project onto, Attachment is love is the wish that others be happy. Compassion is may you not suffer. Love is may you be happy. It's absolutely different from attachment. Attachment is I-based in a neurotic sense. It's fearful, it's lonely, it's needy, it's anxious, it manipulates, it expects. It's scary, actually. It's completely giving all the power to the outside. It's saying that I'm nothing. It's a symptom of a very suffering person, basically, which is all of us. We're all in the same boat. Love is a symptom of health, mental health. It's interdependent, it's connected to the other person, it's spacious, the heart is reaching out, there's a big sense of we. When there's attachment, there's a little lonely I over here, desperate to get that thing into me, to fill me up. Whereas love is spacious, is connected to others, is healthy, and interestingly, isn't disturbing and isn't inaccurate, isn't deluded. It's in touch with how things exist. So these are the so-called positive qualities, not in a judgmental sense, but simply if we recognise that part of ourselves and that can be more prevalent, that is when we're happy. And that is when we can make others happy. When attachment is more prevalent, that is when we suffer, and that's when we inevitably cause others to suffer. But of course, when it's mixed with love, it's really sneaky. We can't see it. We don't do it on purpose. It's just we're not familiar, that's all, with how these things work. Certainly not using Buddha's views anyway, when he's very precise in his assessment of these two. For example, the differences, And so if it is true, which is what Buddha is saying, that our suffering comes from attachment, if it is true, then we need to investigate it, obviously. We need to be able to recognise it. But half the time when we become, let's say become religious or Buddhist or whatever, we sort of chuck the baby out with the bathwater and think we've got to become detached and stop loving people, and we become kind of and we become rather fundamentalist, So we're either hedonists or fundamentalists, completely extreme. So it's really kind of very precise and very refined, the awareness that we need to develop in order to really distinguish between these two. And this is just an example. Love is, so when we practice the compassion wing, it's when we actively do, and there's many, many, many meditations that we are taught in this tradition that go step by step, many, many, many ways of changing the way we see things, which is what the practice is. Shifting our mind, opening our mind, expanding our mind, quite literally to encompass others, So as I said, the direct beneficiary of the compassion wing is others. The reference point is others. But the indirect beneficiary obviously is yourself. And the direct beneficiary of the wisdom wing is self. But obviously the indirect beneficiary is others. And so the very first level of practice is the wisdom wing, where you learn to really, the very basic level, by observing that you don't want more suffering, you attempt to refrain from creating the causes for it. So you refrain from being angry, you refrain from lying, you refrain from to be too much attached, so on and so forth. You kind of watch your body and watch your speech and protect your mind from creating negativity. And the reason is because you do not want further suffering. We're not even discussing compassion yet. It's like compassion for yourself. You check this, if we in this world really realized that anger and depression, for example, are what cause us to suffer, who in their right mind would ever be angry for 1 second if we realized it? So it shows how removed we are from something so fundamental, It's like we're stabbing ourselves every day and we keep blaming the knife. So it's quite profound to realise that anger and jealousy and pride cause us suffering. I remember in a prison in Kentucky where I go once a year to see some people, and some of them are on death row. And one of them was telling me recently about an old guy, some old man, Catholic, who'd been visiting the prisoners, extremely compassionate. But 20 years ago or 30 years ago, I can't remember, he was, and he told them about this, his daughter had been murdered. And so for the first 20 years he was out of his mind with rage, absolutely full of vindictiveness, raging. And he said himself that slowly it dawned on him, after 20 years of intense suffering, that he was suffering because of his own rage. Yes, his daughter had been murdered, but he really realised his own rage was the cause of his suffering, not the person who killed his daughter. So he was so fortunate. He made this profound shift, a paradigm shift in his mind, So now he spends his time visiting the guys on death row, helping them. This is the one, I tell you, it's unbelievable. We're not even discussing compassion for others yet. If we could just slowly realise, without guilt, without shame, but with wisdom, recognise that our own depression, our jealousy, our anxiety, our fears are the source of our pain, and that we can change them. And that we can change them. And that we can change them, To even start with that kind of confidence is already unbelievable. Everything in our life would be different if we had that kind of confidence. But we have to not just believe it, we have to see, look at it, look into it, see the logic of it, And then slowly, slowly, step by step, tiny increment by increment, do that job. We know practice makes perfect. We know that really well. Well, as one Lama Bhavangka Rinpoche, he says, nothing gets difficult with familiarity. It's such almost a simple idea, but so profound, If we have the courage to see it. And actually it does take huge courage, because somehow the irony of attachment and all these delusions is that we're stuck in it. It's almost like we're stuck in a comfort zone, you know. We know we're suffering, and we believe we can't change, but actually it's scary, the thought of changing. It's almost like we'd rather be here, you know. We're familiar with it. Because it's painful. Just like anything when you change. If you're sort of, you're fat and overweight and your muscles are all floppy, and someone says, well, going to the gym and doing push-ups will do you really good, and you'll get really fit and gorgeous, you know. So you run off to the gym and you start doing them. But you end up feeling a lot worse, don't you? You're completely, the blood is rising and you're puffing and panting and aches and pains everywhere. And I mean, we know no way do we like that pain, so we give up, you know. Oh, it didn't make any difference. I tried the gym. It didn't work. You know, I got lots of pain. So when we understand that that's an inevitable part of the process, and actually it's a good sign, then we'll have courage to persevere, because we have a vision of what the potential is at the end. Well, that's how it is with changing our emotions. They're extremely stuck in their ways. You know, it's terrifying to change depression, to change anger. No, I mean, no wonder we believe it's not possible. So you have to have great courage, you know. You really have to have great courage to know it's possible, to want to do it, to see the benefits to myself, not to mention others, and then slowly, slowly to persevere. And to persevere in the pain, because, you know, we're going along now feeling reasonably comfortable like we were before we went to the gym, and now it's like everything's thrown up, it's complete chaos, there's pain, your body's hurting, you're puffing and panting, you've got to get up early, it's difficult, you've got to really commit, you know. And that's the difficulty. And that's why they say, you know, the lamas would say that if you know the benefits of something, then you don't need to be convinced to do it. So we have to first think of the benefits, not just do it because it looks kind of nice, you know. Oh, someone says going to the gym's a good idea. Got to be prepared to work hard at it. There's no question when we start to look at our mind, it becomes extremely difficult. Even they say when you start to learn to do even simple meditation techniques, you think your mind's getting worse. It's not. We're just noticing it for the first time. Or as Lama Zopa Rinpoche said, you know, the dirt has to come out. So we've got to be brave, you know, to do this job. We've got to see intelligently what it's about, understand how to interpret the process as you go along, which is why it's important to have a teacher, a spiritual community. And then just keep moving, one step at a time, never giving up. No choice, you know. In fact, when Buddha talks a lot about we've got this Buddha nature, meaning this potential for perfection, basically. That the logical extension of the small amount of love we have now is to be fully developed love for all beings without exception. You can't go anywhere but there, you know. You have to follow it through logically. Then when we realise that we don't have a choice, almost when we realise this, we realise we don't have a choice. Why, you know, if an acorn can become an oak tree, how foolish to put a cap on it. How foolish to try and stop it from growing more. Oh, well, you know, half an oak tree will do. If it's got the potential to grow to a huge oak tree, please let it do so. It's its nature. It's the nature of that acorn. You don't have a choice, you know. You can't make it a pear tree. So how foolish not to allow it to become what it really is. This is the idea here. What Buddha's saying is what we really are is a Buddha. We're not it yet. An acorn isn't an oak tree yet. You'll be disappointed if you try to get shade from it. But it's like it is. It's so tasty. You might as well say, and especially if for so long you've just thought an acorn was this boring little brown thing, you know, all those little boring brown things messing up my garden. And then one day you discover that it can become that magnificent thing. Then you see it very differently. Well, this is the view that Buddha says we have right now, extremely limited view of who we think we are. Like, you know, you decide that an acorn is a nice little thing, so you polish it up every day and look at it and think, isn't it cute, and all the rest, and get very attached to the little brown thing. But realise that actually what it is this amazing tree. Well, it's like us, and we're kind of trying to polish up this little thing, but we're so limited. Or we think it's horrible and kick it around, you know. We have no choice, Buddha says, when we start to understand the nature of mind. Mind in its nature. Buddha didn't invent this. We weren't made this way. It is simply who we are. An acorn is simply a potential oak tree. No choice. We are simply a potential Buddha, he's saying, you know. Which means, psychologically, the development of what we call all the things we already have within us now. They're in us now. Love, kindness, patience, generosity, you name it. They are our natural state, Buddha says. You don't have to find them and inject them into you, you know. They are already who you are. You don't inject oak treeness into an acorn. You give it the appropriate conditions that allow it to manifest. Well, that's it. We need to find the conditions that will allow our own true nature to manifest. Hear it in a practical way. For whose benefit? My own and others. And how foolish not to do this, you know. How foolish to stay limited, miserable, depressed, blame other people, anxious. It's insane, you know.
And that's all. Thank you very much.
Can we sing a prayer, please? A little wee prayer?
Yes, of course, yes.
Just sing a little tiny prayer, very short. And again, it's like a series of thoughts. Okay, don't get all religious about me. Don't get all holy on me, please. It's a series of thoughts. And these thoughts are basically saying, and I'm really paraphrasing here, you know, that every moment we've been here is as many karmic seeds we've planted on our mind. So these seeds have gone in. You are a different person that walked in this door, you know, 2 hours ago. You're a very different person because you've planted all these seeds that weren't before. So we make this aspiration that they grow, that we nourish them with our virtue from this moment forward, and that they develop into our innate potential. They develop into our own oak tree. Our pure nature develops, you know, for the sake of others. So think like that, this little prayer. And then the second little prayer is making the aspiration that compassion grow and grow. Kewa di nyu du dag lama sangye drub gyurne drowa chikyang malupa de sala Gapashog Jangchog Semchog Rinpoche Make Panam Ke Gyuchi Ke Panyampa Me Payang Gong Ne Gong Du Pelvashog